Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates, with your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everybody. This is Cindy with another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have a special guest. Andrew Shahan is here, and you are joining us from California, correct?
That is correct, Cindy. Yes,
So
San Francisco.
Welcome to the show, and thank you for being here. San Francisco, oh man, the weather's so perfect there in San Francisco. I had relatives that lived there, and she said it's 75 degrees here every day. I'm like, oh. Meanwhile, it's 10 degrees here in New Jersey. So thank you for being here. We're going to just kind of get right into it. You are not a parent, you're a professional in the field, and you've worked with people with autism for, I think, like 30 years, you had said, correct?
Okay. Yeah, 32 years. Woo.
Yeah. How could that be when we're only 35?
I was just going to say.
I always tell people when I tell them how old my kids are, I'm like, I had it when I was 5. And then they have
right, exactly.
They think about it for a second and then they laugh and they're like, wait a minute. Okay. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about what you do, when working with kids with autism.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me. I'm excited and honored to be here. And I think I started my journey, Cindy, right actually the same year that you started your journey, even though we had parallel but very different journeys. I believe you had your son Robbie in 1989. Is that right? Am I remembering right? Yeah. So that's exactly when I began my work in the field. I have a very sort of long and unique, I think, journey and situation as a professional in terms of sort of what I've done, where I've worked, and what I've learned. I would say my current work is really focused on supporting parents and families, and really focusing on using very specific tools to strengthen parent-child relationships and parent-child interactions. And I do the same type of work with professionals as well. I really help professionals learn some specific and concrete things that will help them develop trust and I think more successful interactions with the autistic people that they're serving. So I've been at this for a bunch of years. I've learned a lot. I've made a ton of mistakes. And I feel like everything that I learned and that we've learned about autism has literally been pulled up by the roots. And so it's a very exciting time to be in this field. And I think a terrifying time for many of us, and especially for many professionals who have learned to kind of hang on to one specific type of approach or way of working with autistic people. And my approach and what I've learned is actually quite different, to sort of combine anything and everything possible to really just help us better understand and connect with and support autistic people and, of course, families.
Mm-hmm. So what did you do back in 1989? Did you start as a teacher, as an aide, or what? What was your introduction?
Yeah. So my introduction was essentially, I met a friend at the time. Like, I had just moved to California, was just coming out of college. And in college, I studied psychology to kind of really try to figure out my crazy family. And I think most professionals have some story like that. And so ultimately, I started working in psychiatric hospitals especially with schizophrenic adults. And it was a very intense, as you can imagine, right? A very intense environment. And there wasn't a lot of sort of hope. And it wasn't a lot of fun, and it was not easy to connect with the patients. So this friend of mine, who at the time was working at a group home, a residential program for, developmentally disabled and autistic adolescents, said, why don't you come have dinner with us? And I thought, that sounds interesting. And so but I was like, adults I'm comfortable with. I have no idea what to do with kids. I didn't grow up in sort of like a big extended family with tons of kids. So I was like, I don't know about the kids part, but I'll show up and have dinner. So I remember showing up at the group home and just having some very powerful experiences immediately. One of them was that this kid who was, I think, 11 or so at the time, who was autistic and kind of walked on his tiptoes, came walking right up to me, stared at me, and then started I was sitting down, and he moved in and leaned towards me. And I was like, am I going to die now? Like, what's going to happen? I had no idea what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend at the time, Josh, said, I think he just wants to smell your forehead.
Oh.
And so I kind of just froze, and he literally pressed his nose directly into my forehead, like sort of exhaled to kind of get it to warm up the skin, right? To get a really good whiff. And then he took a big whiff, and then he just kind of got excited and kind of, walked to the side and sort of moved back and forth. And I was like, whoa, like what a way to meet another human being. Like, I want to understand this guy. I want to know like what makes him tick. So that was really like, that was my introduction. And I think that I hung out, I had dinner. I honestly just fell in love with the kids, and they fell in love with me. And I think, that was the beginning of the journey for me.
And so then what? Then what did you do next?
Well, so then I think from there, I loved the group home and the residential program experience. Like it was really about just connecting with the kids and doing a lot of recreational stuff. So this was in Santa Cruz, California. This is a beautiful place, and beaches and hiking. So we were out in the community with the kids all the time, and it was amazing. But I didn't like to.
Did you take a job working with them?
Yeah. So I should say that, right. So I was hired.
Yes,
I was hired as a group home counselor, was the term at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so after, I think maybe 2 or 3 years of that, I loved the work, but I didn't love the overnights part of it. Which was part of the job. So I ended up working under the same organization. They had a school program. So then I worked at the school program, and I was a paraprofessional, what was at the time called a teacher's aide. And that's what I did then for a few more years with that organization. Then I moved, and basically was a paraprofessional in different school programs in what's called here in California non-public schools. So these are kind of for the kids who have more significant challenges and can't really have enough support in regular special ed programs. So I'm sure in Jersey you have your own version of that. So I was a paraprofessional for a lot of years, and I learned a lot of sort of like behavioral programming, right? How to use ABA, and honestly, it always felt to me, Cindy, like with a lot of the behavioral stuff I was learning, I was trying to push kids into these kind of tasks and routines and like interactions that they weren't really motivated for. I didn't really understand the purpose of them, and neither did the kids. And so I always felt like it was this strained and stressed kind of exchange that I was trying to have with kids. And I think that really motivated me to start to really think about and study more about both ABA, but then alternatives. What else is out there, and why are we doing this behavioral stuff? And where's the connection? Where's the relationship that felt a bit missing? So that was the first part of my journey.
So what was your conclusion of that?
Yeah. So
why are we doing this ABA? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interestingly, my conclusion was that we were doing it because it was the best thing we could figure out to try to teach skills, right? These kind of systems of rewards, and if you do this, you'll get this. But what was so clear to me that was missing from that is that the kids were motivated to sort of get through something and get it done and get me off their back and get whatever it was done. Mm-hmm. But they weren't necessarily any more motivated to either do the task in the future or to interact with me in the future, right? They were like, okay, I got that done. Let me get away from people.
Right.
And what I realized then, when sort of what then drove me to the next chapter of my career, was that the relationship was what was most important, right? Like we all do stuff not just because we're getting a reward at the end, but because we care about the people around us and we're connected to people. Right. And so the next phase of my journey was to go work at a program called the Sunrise Program, which I'm sure you've heard of. It's considered still a very controversial program in Western Massachusetts. And the reason why I went there is because I had gotten inspired by reading a couple of their books that, there was something clearly that they had figured out about loving and accepting autistic people for who they are, and not necessarily trying to fix or change them, And so that greatly inspired me. I went to this kind of intensive week-long program there, and I was blown away. And I was like, okay, this is so great. I want to do this more. So I actually ended up like moving there, working there for a couple of years. Ultimately, the program had some, from my perspective, some shortcomings, like every approach does. And so I moved back to California, went back to graduate school because I wanted to learn a lot more about child development, a lot more about autism, really a lot more about communication, right? Because it seemed to me that that was kind of key, that a lot of especially the autistic young people I was working with struggled so much with communication, right? And just being able to get their message across to people. So I wanted to learn a lot more about that. So from that moment sort of forward, after graduate school, I ended up then working in lots of really big organizations. Like I worked at Children's Hospital Oakland, and then I worked for Easter Seals, which is kind of a huge national organization, and a really big healthcare organization called Kaiser Permanente. And my focus then became really helping families and helping professionals not only understand autism, but understand really how to communicate and interact more effectively, more successfully with autistic folks. So that became the focus of my work.
Yeah, I know Robbie's school, they use ABA, and since I've been doing these interviews and just really thinking on things, I've noticed how he was as an adult, and it was all shaped by the ABA. He would never do anything independently. He'd always stand there and wait for you to tell him what to do. And then he was always looking for he loved the positive reinforcement. He wanted the high five, good job, whatever. But there was confusion when he got out of school, and now he had other people working with him. They're expecting him to now just all of a sudden do things independently. And well, Robbie, what do you want to eat? And what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And I'm like, no, you don't. No, he's waiting for you to tell him what to do. He doesn't understand that concept, right. And it's right. Kind of like he was trained now to wait and be told what to do, and then get that good job. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. The other side of that is, obviously ABA is very controversial, and people don't, there's autistic people out there complaining, that they felt humiliated by the way they were treated with ABA, that the constant repetitive, do this. And I guess it's like you're saying, they have no motivation to want to do it. It's just a task that's put in front of them. And it's like, okay, can I just get this done so I can get my reward now? But the problem is, like, my son works in Robbie's old school, and because he's such a big guy, he's a big, strong football player. He's in the class with the kids with the hardest behaviors. Yeah. And the behaviors are just, they're so violent, and constantly violent all day. Yeah. David just got hurt, and so he's on light duty this week. But I keep asking him, but why? But why are they having the behavior? Oh, I don't know. They're just like that. No, there's a reason. And I feel that the reason is communication. You guys are not listening to them. It's too much of do this, and you're not listening to what they want. And they can't speak, so they can't tell you. That's right. That's why I was so fascinated with my interview with Soma. I don't know if you watched that.
Yes. Yeah.
But because what other people were telling me, what RPM is not at all what she said it is. I was very surprised at her whole interview, but she seems to understand them. Yes. Which I think is and for them to finally be able to communicate, is huge. So I'm interested in hearing, ways to get through to them and how to help them to understand. And I love what you were saying. Like, I've heard of Sunrise Program, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know what it is. But their message is the message of my books. I love you just the way you are. Yes. About accepting who they are as an autistic person. We're not trying to change who you are, but yet certain behavior is not acceptable. You can't go outside and just take your pants off. Right. That's for any of my children, autistic or not. That's not unacceptable behavior. Right. You can't just do whatever you want. Okay. There's got to be a fine line, right? But how can you also But how can we help you communicate as well? So I'm
Yes.
curious to know, like, what specifically you do with families and how you work with them.
The problem is very deep and very multi-layered, as you know, and you bring people onto this show constantly, and you're kind of peeling back the onion. And I want to say first, Cindy, I appreciate, like, I admire so much that you're going through this process of kind of openly learning publicly, right? Like, you're just like, okay, let's figure it out. Let's just go for it. And I admire that, appreciate that so much. And that's how I've at least tried to operate in my own career. And part of the problem is that we have a whole system that wants to give concrete answers and wants to have everything figured out. And I think what we're realizing at this point in time is that we don't. We're guessing most of the time. And that's super anxiety provoking for all of us, especially as non-autistic people who are trying to figure out, like, how we're going to help and how we're going to support and how we're going to connect and interact, right? And make life easier for people who have very different brains and bodies that make everyday functioning or just everyday communicating with people harder. Like what do we do? So the way that I work and what I've spent so many years kind of studying and trying to figure out is that, you know, when we talk about what's not working well in terms of sort of like the behavioral system, one of the things that you nailed a minute ago is you said, you know, with Robbie, he was trained to not initiate, but to respond. Right? We have this entire system that's focused on getting autistic people or developmentally disabled people, right? Because ABA is used with, you know, lots of different folks, get people to respond to what we ask them or what we tell them to do, right? That's about 1/2 of what any of us as a human being needs to be successful in the world. We have to be able to initiate. And that's one of the things, if I boil everything down to what I've most learned over the last 32 years, it's that what we've got to do is focus more on how to help and support and encourage autistic people and everyone else to initiate, right? To go through that hard process, which is much harder in many ways for many reasons for them, to be able to convey to us what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they want, what they need. Because what I have to do, and this is the hardest part for me as a non-autistic person, is I've got to learn how to shut up and listen. And I've got to learn how to tune in to signals and cues that person might be giving me that I can so easily miss because I'm looking for neurotypicals. I'm looking for speech. I'm looking for, right, like the things that you and I are doing here on this call together come much more easily or naturally for us. So a big part of my work is literally using video as a tool where parents send me short videos of their everyday interactions with their kids. And what we do is just through that process of watching video together, we really spotlight where there's moments of communication, where there's moments of connection, and how to make that stronger and how to build that. And also, especially, how to really help families and professionals encourage a lot more spontaneous communication and initiative from their kids, which is not easy to do. So that was so clear in what you said. And it's very painful for me to look back sometimes at all of the times when, as a professional, I had the best of intentions in my interactions with kids, and I was steamrolling over them constantly because I was trying to kind of pull communication out of them, because that's what the model is, and that's what I learned how to do. So part of what's so hard is for families and for professionals, I have to be willing to learn, and I have to be willing to slow myself down. And we're all moving really fast, especially in this day and age. So it's a constant learning process, Cindy. And I think you were in the trenches of that, you know, every day as a mom. And I don't think you got, honestly, the kind of guidance and support that you should have. No family does in this system.
No, well, I say this repeatedly, but, you know, when Robbie was diagnosed, it was like, you know, 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000, you know, nobody had autism really that you knew of. And now it's 1 in 32 kids, you know, so now it's very common, but back then it was not. And there was no internet, there was no way to research anything. So I knew nothing. So I left it to the hands of the professionals, you know. So I put him in a school for autistic kids, and I figured these guys are trained, they know what they're doing. I'm just going to step back and let them do their thing. But what I did want to mention, though, is if I remember correctly, I think autism really was only first diagnosed in the 60s, was when a doctor finally started, you know, diagnosing kids with autism. And he said it was the 50s or 60s. And he said it was caused by frigid mothers that rejected their children and never wanted that baby to begin with. And I was like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Robbie was very wanted, planned, very loved, you know, that was silly. But, and so now it was only from the 60s to the 80s, late 80s, you know, it was the 90s that Robbie was in school. So within that 30-year period was someone had invented, right, ABA, and I'm pretty sure it was someone in California, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes.
And that's all they knew. I mean, really, this is kind of a new thing. I mean, it's not like, you know, it's not like diseases that have been around for hundreds of years, right? And it's all behavioral. It's diagnosed only by behaviors, right? So that's only been their focus. But so now, from the time that Robbie was little until now, okay, now we see the shortcomings, right? Now, right? But it takes living through it and doing it and making just like what you're talking about. It's from doing it and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And I think we're now getting to the point, this new generation of parents is much more knowledgeable. There's a lot more information out there, right? And a lot more autistic people speaking that have grown up now and said, hey, I went to, you know, and so I think it's time for change. You know, and we need to look at how we've been doing things and what's working and what's not working, right? And so I think you're at the forefront of that. So, you know, I'm happy to hear, you know, everything that you're saying. So my question that I always start saying now is, well, what's the answer? Well, what do we do about it? You know, like, people are really good at complaining. Okay, that's right. But how do we fix it?
That's right. That's right. That's right. I think, Cindy, that's the most important question is, like, what are we gonna do differently, and what are we gonna do to come up with solutions? And I think you and I we see this all the time. Our field right now is incredibly divided. Like, it's an incredible thing to see. You know, like on any kind of webinar that I'm a part of, right? There's all these like warring factions, right? Like, all, you know, it's like that. And I understand we have to play a role. And I think we're building a movement here. I think we have to be, if we're going to create solutions, it's going to take people like you and people like me to really ask the hard questions and to really be willing to listen to everyone's perspective. And so I don't think of myself as an expert. I think of the people who are the true experts, honestly, as autistic people and as parents and families, right? So the people who have the most wisdom about what needs to change and how we need to improve things are people like you and people like the, what's the woman's name I wrote it? Becca Laurie, you know, people who sort of have incredible wisdom, lived experience, who can actually say, here's what I didn't receive. Here's the kind of school, the kind of professional that I wish I had had. That's where the solutions are going to come from moving forward. I have a lot less trust, honestly, in professionals, even though there's some wonderful professionals out there, because all of us have our own agendas and sometimes are really locked into, this is the approach that works, and this is the approach that research says, blah, 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 blah. You know, a lot of that is getting completely pulled up by the roots, including ABA. Mm-hmm. And so if I've spent my entire career teaching ABA and telling people that ABA is the best path, I'm going to be really stressed if autistic people are coming forward and saying ABA was not helpful for me, and there's actually got to be a better way. So I think where it starts, Cindy, is with what you're doing, but I think we also have to look beyond autism, and I think we've made some really big mistakes. My background is early childhood special education, and I would say over and over again, this is what I see, Cindy, is how often parents and families are led to believe that they can't trust themselves and they can't trust their own interactions with their kids, right? Because as you've experienced, right, that the go-to people are the professionals. Andrew knows best. I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do. I'm going to tell you the techniques. I'm going to give you the manual. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to say, no, don't do that. Do this instead, right? So part of the reason why our system, I think, is so broken is that what we've not done is we've not actually trusted that parents have incredible wisdom and intuition and strength that we're not using, that we're not paying any attention to.
Parents put a lot of pressure on themselves because you hear all these things that you should be doing. I've talked to other moms about that. The culture when Robbie was diagnosed was to try to snap them out of it and cure them of their autism, and there were all these different techniques and stuff. And you felt like, well, if I didn't put him on this vitamin therapy or take him to do this or that, I'm a bad parent. I'm a terrible parent, or you hear of the parent stories that, oh, I got into my child's world and I pulled him out, and I'm like, I guess I'm not doing something right then,
Right. Then I must not have done it right. Of course. Yeah. And that's a crock that gets dumped on families and on parents constantly. I mean, you spoke to that earlier, Cindy, when you said this whole idea that sort of the mom is to blame, the family's to blame. That's a very easy go-to strategy that professionals use all the time, so that I, as a professional, don't have to take responsibility for my own failed program, for my own failed approach, for my own failed techniques. And I think that's been in existence for a lot of generations. And I think you as parents have had to carry that constantly. That's also why I think it is so toxic right now for parents sometimes to hear from well-intentioned autistic self-advocates, stop, you're harming your child by putting them, in ABA. Like, you've had enough already of those kinds of messages saying you're not good enough, you're not doing enough, you're not, you're not getting it right. And so it's like this double whammy. And I would say this, I understand the anger from the autistic community for what they've experienced with some not helpful therapy or ABA. Like, there's no denying that. There's no sort of defending against that. But the people who should be on the receiving end of that anger and frustration are not the moms, are not the parents. What needs to change is the system, right? Right. And as parents, you've been told this is what the science says, this is the medicine that your child needs, is this behavioral program, right? And so I just think all the time, we need to change these kinds of conversations. And we definitely need to listen more instead of yelling at each other, as you see all the time on these on these social media.
Thankfully,
sites.
I'm not the brunt of any of that. But I interviewed Eileen Lamb from Autism Cafe. I mean, it's just become a daily thing with her, with the butting heads. Like you said, just yelling at people and yelling at parents, and said you shouldn't be doing that. I feel like when they say ABA is abuse because they went through abuse, it's like saying, well, my mother was abusive, so all mothers are abusive. No, I don't believe that. Okay, yeah, could ABA have been a bad situation for some people, but that doesn't mean it's bad for everyone. But my issue is that it only focuses on behavior. It's not focusing on communication.
That's right.
And like you said, it's important to listen. And my son couldn't speak a word. So people would say, well, how do you understand him? Because I'm his mother, because I know. It's like with your baby, a tired cry from an angry cry from I'm frustrated from, whatever. And I just think there needs to be more focus on listening, like you said, trying to figure out who they are and letting them communicate, because I think a lot of the behaviors because they can't communicate. So I think there needs to be more focus on that. Like I'd love to see all schools use RPM and whatever kind of other methods are out there, and just be open to any of it, whatever gets through, because to the child, because every kid is different.
Yes, 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 Cindy. So that's the kind of system that we have to advocate for.
Right.
And I would say this, like, I mean, I've been at this for, a few years. I think it's time to just say and just acknowledge and admit, and I say this as an autism professional, like the system's broken. It's not working well.
Mm-hmm.
And just admit that and acknowledge that and say, what are we going to do instead? Like you said, what would it mean if the whole focus of the classroom was not trying to get kids to finish these tasks and to sort of learn all of these sort of skills that we somehow think are going to improve the quality of their life long term? What if the whole focus was, how can I build rapport and trust with this child in such a way that I understand what they're trying to communicate, and how can I give them more tools to communicate with me? That's a totally different focus, a totally different agenda. And schools were not set up for that. Schools are set up to teach academic skills, not social emotional skills or communication skills. So it's really, really, I'm not saying it's an easy change, but I think it starts, Cindy, with having sort of just acknowledging where we are. And that we've got to create a better, like, what if the system that we create is a system that's focused on what your book says, right? Like, I love you just as you are. Like, what if professionals were trained, right, to see every single autistic, developmentally disabled person that they encountered as an incredibly valuable human being who just needed to be accepted completely for who they are? What if that was our starting point? Instead of, I got to teach and fix, I got to get you to learn certain skills. Like, I notice as a professional over the years, the minute that I start pushing, like, I'm going to get you to do this, I'm going to teach you this, right? The minute I come with that pressure to an interaction with an autistic or a developmentally disabled person, over. They're gone. They feel that pressure.
Yeah.
Right. And they feel that lack of kind of, hey, what's up? Like, I want to be with you. I want to hang out with you.
Right.
That's where we need to go.
I think that's true for anyone. No one wants to be pushed like that. Nobody wants somebody to be in your face and try to force you to do something, whether you like it or not. It's nobody wants that.
Yeah. None of us want that. That doesn't work for any of us, right? Who are the people that you most want to hang out with, right? They're people who usually, like, enjoy listening to you, right? Enjoy, like, oh, you like to do that? Oh yeah, that's great. I enjoy that too, right? People who we have stuff in common with, who like to listen to us, and people who seem to get joy from being with us. That's who we all want to hang out with. It's no different for an autistic or developmental disabled person. And we have lost sight of that because we've gotten really focused on skill, teach, and not the relationship. So
I think you kind of hit it when you were talking about the way schools are set up academically. A regular public school is all about getting you to the point where you're going to pass your SATs. Right. It's pass this test, then we pass the big test, then you get off to college, and that means we did a good job, right? You hit all the numbers, and that's what schools are all about to me. And that's what a lot of, right? And I have an issue with that as well, because I feel like every kid has different learning styles. I'm very visual. I'm not an auditory learner. I'm a hands-on learner. I was a terrible reader when I was a kid in school. I read all the time now, but it was a problem for me. If I wasn't interested in what I was reading, my mind would repeat over and over and over. I just couldn't get through it, right? So I feel like, well, there could have been better ways to teach. Why do we use the same teaching method for the past couple hundred years of a teacher just standing up there talking, when kids they're used to being on their, it's worse now than when I was a kid. Kids are constantly on their electronics, and their TikTok lasts all of 5 seconds, boom, on to the next thing, right? But yet we think we can stand there and talk to them for a half hour and they're going to pay attention, right? There's got to be hands-on. I feel schools should be split up by different learning styles, right? So now let's throw in a kid that has ADD, ADHD, whatever, right? Let's throw that in the mix, or a kid that has autism or whatever, right? And you think that everybody's going to fit into that same mold, right? So, and that's kind of what I feel like ABA is, that like to the extreme. It's like, no, you're going to learn this and you're going to learn it now, you know, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and it's not the teacher's fault, because the teachers are doing what they've been taught.
That's exactly right.
They've been taught this is the way to do it.
Yes. And just to say, like, Cindy, that's such a, thank you for saying that. I really, you know, as somebody with a, you know, with a background, a special ed background, it's really important that message gets heard and gets reinforced. Teachers, paraprofessionals, educators, therapists, like, everybody's doing the best they can, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is that you ask the question, why are we still doing the same stuff that we were doing like 20 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is the amazing thing about, you know, the ABA example is really powerful. Why are we still using a system that was developed in the 1950s, mm-hmm. before we knew all the stuff that we know now about learning and about neuroscience and about our brains and bodies and our central nervous systems and social emotional development? Like, we've come a long way since the 1950s, but yet we're still using, in many ways, some of these teaching practices that are super outdated. The reason is because systems are systems. And I've worked in a lot of really big organizations and a lot of really big systems. And, you know, we keep doing what we're doing because somehow when we've invested in something and we have some kind of, like, even if they're really limited, demonstrated results that something works, we get really stuck. And that's exactly what has happened. And I think that, again, the way forward is to acknowledge that we're stuck, and that we have to be willing to listen to people like Soma, mm-hmm. And really take a really close look at what she's figured out and what she's doing, mm-hmm. In collaboration, you know, with autistic people, in collaboration with families. Like, let's put all of those pieces together. I think we're going to get to a better place, but we have to stop wanting to sort of kill each other first. Right? Yeah. Like, yes. and it's like, and the emotion is real, like the anger, you know, and the frustration is real. And I don't want to minimize any of that, and just acknowledging how furious people can be, because this is about people's livelihoods, it's about people's families, it's about, right, it's intense stuff. But I think we can do better, and we have to. I mean, for families, for children, for, you know, for everyone's sake, we've got to do better. And I'll say that the professionals who are working in these systems are torn up, right? Like, your son is a great example of a guy who's just trying to help. Like, he, you know, I have no doubt he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's just trying, you know, and he's just in there trying to figure it out and trying to help. And he gets beaten up, torn up, and he's like, what the heck, what's going on? Like,
he's just doing what they're telling him
exactly.
To do.
Yes.
The teachers are telling him to do. And,
that's right.
And these are teachers that have been doing this for 30 years, and they've been doing the same way for 30 years. And this is what we do. And I want him to think, because that's just who I am. I ask questions. I don't know. I'm not that I'm a skeptic, but I'm just that way generally in life. I'm like, but why? But I don't know. Is that really right? Or, you know, I ask questions. I'm like, I don't know about that. So, and I think more people need to not just blindly follow the masses and just do it because that's the way we've always done it. I think everybody needs to ask questions. So I'm just trying to get him to just ask questions. I'm like, well, obviously this is not working. Obviously this child is frustrated and angry all day, every day when they're here. Why?
Yes. And, you know, the thing that is exciting is that there are different approaches that are getting more traction now. So just in terms of yours, because I am always like, especially when there's any like men who are coming into the field, I want to hang out with your son and say, no, don't leave, man. We need you. Stay. And there's different paths and schools with different models and different approaches that I think, you know, where that wouldn't sort of end up with this exact situation for your son, where
Right.
he can be used in a better way. And so I'm saying that because
Yeah. It's
I want to talk to
exhausting.
him. Yeah,
I will
yeah,
tell you that.
yeah.
I could see that he's exhausted when
Yes,
he comes home. My daughter taught, she was exhausted. She would come home and take
yes,
a nap all the time. And there's a high burnout rate. The teachers don't
absolutely.
last long. They last 5 or 6 years, whatever. Then they want to get married, have a kid, and never come back because they're
Right,
so
right,
stressed out.
right.
And I think for both ends, for the kids and for the teachers, there's got to be, a better way. So, and if they would just ask questions instead of just getting frustrated and just
That's
want to
right.
quit, how can we fix it?
That's the hard part, Cindy, because like I'm with you on the question asking, and it's what's going to lead us forward. But I also know that when I was a paraprofessional and when I was working in a classroom, and the kids that I was working with had some incredible challenges. Many of them were non-speaking and had some really intense behavior. And I mean, all of it, like I got torn up and pooped on and, everything. And I was trying to ask those questions. And I actually ended up realizing that if I kept asking questions, that was the end of my job.
Right.
And that's the really hard part, is that there's a lot of, especially of younger people who come into this field to help and like, just, want to be supporting kids. But then when the system can grind down on that, and when you can have, like the behavior plans, and I've got to do this. And I even if it doesn't feel right, even if in your son's case, even if his intuition is saying, "Ooh, I don't know if this is the right way to intervene in this situation with this kid," he's forced to do it because that's what the behavior plan says, or that's what the teacher says. So it's a really tricky and difficult thing, because then if he asks too many questions,
right,
he's in trouble. So we've got to just acknowledge that and say, how did we get to that point where you're not asking questions anymore? Right? That should be the best thing, to have paraprofessionals and teachers and a whole system that's like, well, wait a minute, whoops, we didn't get this right. Why not? Like, why did this kid melt down or blow out? And what do we need to learn? What do we need to do differently? And again, that doesn't happen because people are burned out, stressed out, and are just doing what we've all learned. So it's right now, my heart goes out to all the professionals who are in that situation, because they're trying really hard. And I'll say this, even the professionals who are doing stuff that I wish they would do differently, right? Like I've worked with some amazing teachers and therapists and paraprofessionals, including ABA practitioners, who just really believe that what they're doing is helpful, and is the path, and is the most effective approach. They care. They're not just monsters who want to just harm kids, right? They're like, they're trying to do the right thing. But again, they've not been well supported. They've not been encouraged to ask the questions, and they've been trained in a particular approach that sometimes they're clinging to, that is not giving them the solutions that they need. And so they just keep holding on tighter to it. I think that happens all the time.
Well, I'm imagining like a friend of mine, one of the ones that I interviewed, my first interview, actually, she's a special ed teacher, but she goes to people's homes and she helps them, kind of like the nanny. They always said that a lot of parents need that. I just need the nanny to come in and just tell me what to do with my kids, because it's a disaster here, and I just need help, right? So she would be somebody independent, right? So that would be somebody that could kind of combine what she's learned over the years of, like, you could take a little bit of, I learned this from Soma, I learned this from ABA, I learned this from right? And just sort of combine everything and individualize something to work with every kid.
Yes.
Okay, that's great in theory, but the problem is that insurance pays for ABA, right? Now, if you get into doing your own private thing, insurance may not cover that, right? And then I'm just sort of thinking out loud.
No, that's the $1 million, or I should say the $1 billion question, because here's the reality, right? ABA is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Wow.
When you have this kind of stuff get legislated in, when you have laws that are created that say, here's the approach that all insurance companies are going to use because it's evidence-based, right? I saw all of this happen in California. I was on a commission that was sort of giving like recommendations to the state about what should we be doing, what should constitute evidence-based practice. And what was so amazing about it is the law was actually designed to be more inclusive. So the law itself in California says ABA and other evidence-based practices. It doesn't say ABA and nothing else. Okay. But the way the law has trickled down and got interpreted was that it's ABA or nothing. So what's happening now, and I know this is the case in Jersey right now, this is now expanding. So insurance companies are absolutely now beginning to broaden what they will fund to include, for example, developmental approaches such as floor time, for example, right? So I know that is changing for many reasons, but that's a good thing. That the system is sort of being pushed and forced to sort of open wider. I hope that continues to happen. But I think what you're asking is, how do we get more stuff funded, right? And I would just say that we have a long way to go to, again, have all of us sitting at the table, including the legislators and the lawmakers and the insurance companies, to say, we have to have a different way forward, because there's been a lot of money spent, but I'm not sure we see the kind of outcomes that we should be.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to get at is, if we come up with new methods and new therapies, or however you want to word it, an issue that a parent might face would be like, yeah, but insurance won't cover that. And I think it was probably a big step for insurance to finally pay for ABA, right? Yes. So we now have that. So it's not like we don't want to take that away, but I feel like we need to open it and make it broader, which it sounds like that is happening, which is a good thing. So that if people come along and say, well, I'm going to use, my own mixture of therapies that I found that work, want to make sure that the insurance will cover it, so that's not something that stops it.
Right. And I do think that this has been a real barrier to progress, is understandably, right? Like you just said, families finally, after so many years of not getting anything covered in terms of health insurance, finally there were laws passed that said, your insurance company has to provide whatever a certain number of hours of home-based behavioral care or treatment. And so at this point, after like now, families that have insurance can finally, or Medicare can finally get some support. What family is going to say, the support that we're getting sucks. It's not working well, because then of course the fear is that the insurance companies are going to say, okay, great, you don't want it, that's totally fine. Right. And so it's been this I think this real, like, that's one of the reasons why we've stayed so stuck, because parents are terrified. If they say anything, if they complain, if they say that this is not really, this doesn't seem like it's working, then they're going to get nothing. Right. So that's, I think, again, we've been stuck there for a while, and I think that's got to change, as you're pointing to.
I'm just trying to figure out what the steps are, to bring about the change. So does it come from the top down? Does it come from whatever, as we said, like the aides, then the teachers, you can't really ask questions because you'll lose your job, right? So then that means the people over them have to be open to change. And as I've interviewed different moms, it seems like different schools have different cultures, and some schools are very open to other things, and some schools are not, so that tells me that comes down, from the top. And then
I think, Cindy, that the change, if just we look at the history of like special education, or all of the sort of laws that were put into place to provide support for families, the people who have always been, at the forefront, right, like, of change are our families and parents, right, who have always been, like, that's how special education laws came about, right? Like, so I think parents and families have always been the strongest voices and most powerful facilitators of change. I don't think that the responsibility should lie on just the shoulders of families. I think it's going to have to be a much bigger collaboration between families and professionals, as well as autistic and developmentally disabled folks who are, who are saying this needs to change. So I think if we put those forces together, I don't think there's any question that change is going to happen. So I think we're in some ways, I really see it this way, like we're at a tipping point, and that's a good thing. But we have to have a lot more conversations like this with a lot more, have to be a lot of different people at the table.
Yeah, and that's what I'm just trying to think of, who do those people need to be to bring about the change?
I think people that are leaders in school, educational leaders, right? People who are leaders in sort of like the early intervention fields. I know in California, we have a different system. We have sort of the way that the state funds the early intervention system in a certain way. And those kinds of decision makers need to be at the table, right? To sort of need to have a voice. How do we want treatment to look different? What's really interesting is that in California, we definitely have, California likes to think of itself as the leader, the innovator, the kind of, ahead of the curve. I think there's some much more exciting stuff happening in Jersey right now, Cindy. I don't know if if you feel that way, but there's some really, really cool organizations and programs happening in Jersey right now. So I think change is.
I don't know. I'm a little out of the loop. That's why I've been doing these interviews, so that I can.
Well, yeah, it's important to to have a balance there, because it's.
I think one of the interviews I did was with Dana Walker. I just did not too long ago, and she is in the special ed. She works with hearing impaired kids, and she was talking about being at the IEP meetings until she ended up having a son with autism, and now she suddenly found herself at the other side of the table.
Oh, yes.
She wasn't getting what she needed, and she actually had to hire an attorney to get help. And now she sits on the board of whatever. And I think that's what I've always said. It always takes a parent. And I always say government's not going to do anything to help us until the governor has an autistic kid themselves, and that's once you actually have the kid yourself and you really have a heart for it, that's when change happens. So I'm answering my question. I think that, when the people, the decision makers, when they're the ones that actually become the parent of the autistic kids, and they see things from both sides of the table, maybe that's when change starts to happen.
That's right. Yes. And we got to ask the hard questions.
Right.
We got to ask the hardest possible questions, because we can't keep going the way we've been going. It's really amazing when we all look at how much money has been spent. We should be doing a whole lot better. What's amazing for me, Cindy, too, is because I have a lot of family in Europe, like in Northern Europe and Austria, especially. Europe has a very different system, in terms of how healthcare is funded, paid for, et cetera. So what's been really amazing for me to learn, as I've learned more about how to use video as such a powerful tool to strengthen parent-child relationships, professional child relationships, I have learned a lot from folks in Europe, because their system does not fund, generally speaking, an intensive one-on-one kind of 30-hour a week, whatever model. It doesn't fund ABA, because what it's doing is investing money differently in creating higher quality classrooms and after school programs, and then also providing families with much more individualized, much more flexible types of support. And so again, when you spend your money differently, I think you can have different, and I would argue better outcomes. So in Europe, things work differently. And I've always believed that we've got to take some wisdom from some different systems and learn from that. We like to believe that we're the center of the world, and we have everything. Best systems, right, in the US, but it has been very powerful for me to learn what's worked differently in Europe, and to realize that's where some of the answers and solutions are gonna come from, in terms of thinking differently about. We've got to come up with some different ways of supporting families and better schools and programs, et cetera, and not just pour millions of dollars into this one singular way.
Yes. Well, okay. So I've had you on here for quite a while here. So for anyone that's living out in San Francisco area, if they feel that they need help, how would they contact you, get in touch with you? How does it work?
Yeah. So they would just go to my website, autismcoaching.org is the best way to get a hold of me. And
so it's private. It's not something that they get through the doctor or through the school or anything like that. They just would reach out to you individually.
At this point, yes. And what I'm doing currently is working with larger organizations and systems so that what I'm doing and offering is ultimately going to be provided by the early intervention system. As you know, when we have one approach that's locked in right now, there hasn't been as much openness to an alternative, but that's changing. So that's because I'm one, I'm one person, and I just can't get to as many families as sort of need and deserve help. So that's just important for any of us that are doing this work professionally to say, like, we've got to roll stuff out so more families have access to better care. And so that's my plan. But so that's my website, and I'm working currently outside of those systems.
So you don't have other people that do what you do, and you need to multiply yourself.
Yes, not yet, but
train people under you to do what you do.
Yeah. There's a wonderful organization that I would also point people to called Positive Development. It's a developmental approach. I know they have an office in New Jersey, and I know they're growing quickly. But again, they are getting now more and more families are able to get insurance funding for their combination of sort of home-based programs and virtual programs. So there is some parent and family coaching that's happening through their organization. So that's another resource for families.
What I'm happy called again?
Positive Development is the name of the organization. I know they have a chapter in Jersey. So,
but if you're working virtually, you could work with people from anywhere, no?
Correct. The time differences are the only right. The only challenge. But I am working with some families on the East Coast, as well as actually all over the country, and a few in Europe. So yeah, everything has opened up as you know, with virtual stuff.
Yeah. So right now, somebody from New Jersey can talk to someone from California.
Yes.
Yes, I did an interview with someone from Scotland, and we can all over. All right. Well, wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much for being with me today and talking about this very controversial subject, but but hopefully, change will come one step.
Yeah. Thank you, Cindy. It's been a joy, and I think that you're on the front lines of facilitating change through these at least starting conversations, and think that we can really bring about important and exciting changes to improve care, and it's gonna take a while, but I'm hopeful. So thanks so much for what you do.
Yeah, so great. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Cindy. It was my joy and honor to be here finally on your show. So yes, thanks for what you do. I look forward to binging on your shows even more now.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. To see the video version of the show, go to our YouTube channel, Robbie and Me, Autism Reality. If you're interested in buying our book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, the link will be in our episode description, as well as my Instagram and Facebook pages. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like more content, please be sure to hit that like button, follow us, and don't forget to leave us a great review. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.